The Nikolai Ehlers saga has finally concluded, and he's now a Carolina Hurricane. And now it's up to the Jets to find his replacement.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of the Locked On Winnipeg Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we are starting off with thoughts on Nikolaj Ehlers signing a deal with the Carolina Hurricanes. We all knew that this was coming. It was really just a matter of time. It's now been officially confirmed. He's a Hurricane for 6 years. And the Jets are kind of left with a really tough decision on how to replace him and what to do about this upcoming season. But of course, that's also going to play into whether or not the Jets make trades. And I think that there's a decent chance that the Jets are going to be patient here and maybe sort through a couple of different choices, because a lot of teams need to cut salary, and the Jets could potentially boost their roster a bit with a guy who might not be, the most sexy name out there, but who could at least help the Jets be more competitive this season. Lastly, though, as much as I said the Jets may not have really improved in free agency and are unlikely as of right now to make a really big splash in the trade market, they have definitely gone above and beyond to repair the Moose. And let me tell you, I think this Moose team this year is going to be really friggin' good. But first, let's start off with the big club, right? So the Jets obviously made a real big move here, kind of letting all of this Ehlers stuff sort of go. And ultimately, if they were serious about competing last year, it had to be this way, right? You looked at Ehlers as kind of an internal rental. That's just the way it was going to be. And I wouldn't have wanted them to do it any other way. You weren't trading Ehlers. You weren't going to get a very good value for him on the trade market. There was just no reason to go that route. I guess the big question now is, with Ehlers gone, what are the Jets losing? And what's kind of funny is when you think about his deployments and stuff and how the team used him, technically, you could argue that the Jets aren't going to miss him as much as they might on a team that would use him as a top 6 player. So on the face of it, yes, the value that you're technically losing is not going to be as significant as if you were losing a top-line player. That much is kind of sort of true. Where I think people might be underestimating the impact here, though, is that Ehlers sort of helped make the top 9 a little more balanced. You look at how, the Lowry line is built, you look at how the 2 top skill lines are built, and you kind of realize that once you get past some of these groupings, the Jets are a little bit thin on offense. They have a very clear system for forechecking and how they build their defensive structure, and that's not really likely to change, but the speed that this team has definitely is a little bit on the slower side, right? And it's only going to get a little bit more tricky with the Jets now losing Ehlers and bringing in guys like Gustav Nyquist, Tanner Pearson, and of course, Cole Koepka. None of these guys are necessarily known for elite speed, which is fine. But I think if you look at the team as a whole, the Jets are likely to really get slow. Taves, we don't really know what he's going to be like, but my guess is, he's not going to be the fleetest of foot. We know that Nyquist is also kind of slowing down. He's 33 or 34, and the other guys, Pearson, he's almost 34 now. Koepka is 27, so he's on the younger side. But again, skating and edge work, not really the central thing that he's known for. He does hit a lot, so that's positive if you're looking for somebody who's going to be a bit of a physical force. But you can just kind of tell the Jets don't really have a big free agent here that's replacing Ehlers. I think, with the market kind of thinning out very quickly, even before July 1st opened, it left very few options for the Jets to really pursue. Andrew Mangiapane probably would have been the one guy that you would really look at outside of maybe a Jonathan Drouin. And, both of these options I would have been okay with. Drouin's, I think, a little bit overhated. He's a solid middle 6 guy. Mangiapane, also kind of the same way. I think Andrew would have done a pretty good job with the Jets and been a crafty winger with some good puck handling and stick skills, some decent passing and shooting. And I know that his last season with the Caps looked a little bit underwhelming, but I think he would have done similar performances to what he did with the Calgary Flames. So I think the Oilers made a really smart bet. They really didn't have to pay much for him, just $3.6 million per season. And that just seems, like a pretty fair 2-year contract. Also, not one that I think the Jets could have gotten away with. If his ask from Winnipeg was more in the $5 million range, I would have been a little bit hesitant. I just don't think, Mangiapane is the kind of guy who's going to raise the ceiling of the team enough to where it's worth it, right? If you're spending the money, you want to make sure that you're really going for a major upgrade. And we just know that there's not really anyone in free agency that would do that and that was willing to come to the Jets. Most of the guys already extended with their respective teams or already signed new contracts with their new clubs. And the Jets were just not really shopping for the big fish there. Brock Besser would have been the only one that I think was likely to be on their must-have list. That didn't really happen. He signed with Vancouver. And I'll be honest with you, I think the Jets really did dodge a big bullet. With Ehlers, it's interesting because you look at his contract and he's actually not making as much money as you would have thought. $8.5 million per season for 6 years, which is less than what the Jets offered. Winnipeg offered 8 by 8. And I think that that's pretty notable because it tells you that it's not about the money. With Ehlers, I think it's really a role thing. And we've seen a lot of press coverage of this whole bright lights in Winnipeg thing. I'm going to be honest, I don't really buy that so much. It may be the storyline and narrative that they're going with, but I think partly, it's really just a role thing for Ehlers. He's always been treated more in the middle tier of this team. He hasn't been given the prime billing of a Connor or a Scheifele. And I think he feels that if he goes somewhere else like a Carolina, he'll have that option to play more and have a bigger part of the offense. I know that people will kind of say, well, he didn't really earn it, and maybe he's being used in this way to maximize his potential. And it's just like a little bit silly, right? When he was with, Scheifele and Velarde on the top line, that was one of the best top lines we've ever had. So it's really not hard to imagine him going to a team like Carolina that might have a little more offensive depth to support him, might have a coach that can make more use of his rush offense, and, he'll probably put up pretty solid numbers. So it's a little unfortunate that this is the route it's gone. I think the replacement part for him is going to be even more challenging for the Jets unless they go to the trade market. But if you're looking at free agents, not happening. There's just no one out there that can really do what Nick does and do it in, impressive fashion. If you're looking internally, you could maybe try Jibrikov or Lambert. Neither of those guys are going to be good enough to do that role, though, especially, on the power play where his creativity and that positional shifting thing was, I think, a really big part of why that unit was so successful for the first half of the season. So whether it's 5v5 or 5v4, you're going to notice Nick's not there. And I think the 5v5 thing is less because, he was the most transformative presence, but because when you start looking at, even with his limited ice time, thinking about who replaces him, you're going to have lesser players occupying that role, which means all of the wingers get bumped up a line above what they probably should be. And that kind of has a bit of a domino effect on this offense. A lot of people got mad on the last episode and said I was, I guess discussing this and overthinking it, saying that the Jets are likely to take a big step back. Listen, a wild card 1 or 2 would be a top 3 finish in the East. I think the Jets are going to have to really have like a fantastic season from Hellebuck or a big trade in order to really match last year's team. They're not going to win the President's Trophy, but they can at least be competitive in the upper part of the Central Division if they play their cards right. But I don't know if that's really the plan, and it doesn't seem like the pieces that they've brought in are going to push them that direction. This is frankly not the same team that we saw last year. We don't know what Lowry's going to be like when he comes back. He might not be the same guy, to be quite honest. The surgery that he had doesn't sound very light. Taves, we just don't really know enough about him at this stage of his career. And you look at the rest of the team, and for the most part, the guys that they've brought in are older and slower than who they were replacing. So it's going to be a tricky situation. I don't think that this is a very one-size-fits-all thing, and I think the Jets are kind of looking at this upcoming season as a transition season. So that being said, the door opens very much for a big trade, and I want to talk about the likelihood that Winnipeg maybe goes to another team to try and bring in some forward help, because I don't think that they can go into this season with the roster as is. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. It's more than just a budgeting app, though. It's a complete financial command center. Monarch Money helps you track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So, in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. It's kind of like having Chevy managing a roster and balancing your finances. Maybe you're spending a little more on a free agent service that you didn't really realize. All those subscriptions that you have, maybe you don't need all of them. Monarch Money can help you consolidate and cut down on those costs. And if you've got a partner or spouse, there are shared account features, so you'll always have visibility on your tracked and shared expenses. And you can also set goals together. It's great. It takes out all the stress, and it does it all in one spot. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNNHL for half off your first year. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting a little bit about the implications of Nick Ehlers, now departed, and the Jets, quite frankly, have some really big decisions to make, right? They need to find some forward help because the team right now is kind of in a tough spot. Winnipeg has a lot of guys that they've brought in on very cheap one-year deals. I think it tells you that they're looking at the season more in the transition sense rather than the competitive sense. And I don't know if it's intentional or if this is just kind of what their best attempt is in free agency. But you notice the depth signings probably don't move the needle a lot, and I think that they're cognizant of this. That doesn't mean, though, that the Jets are necessarily done this offseason. I sort of read this right now as Winnipeg just kind of waiting to see what happens with the dust settling. A lot of teams didn't really get what they wanted in free agency, and so the trade market is probably about to heat up a lot. Or we're already hearing rumors that teams are getting very aggressive shopping because free agency was a huge bust. Most players either signed big deals with their respective teams already and current teams, or, you saw maybe one or two major trades that did not impact everyone else. So very interesting situation. But a team that I would look at as needing to cut salary and that the Jets might be talking to is the Florida Panthers. Now, the Panthers obviously need to make some move and some room. They've got about $3 million over the cap next season, especially with this new Marchand contract. And guess what? They've got a guy who might be on that block. Evan Rodriguez, $3 million for the next 2 seasons. 32-year-old left winger. He's been a very good middle six producer. He is likely to be shipped out here pretty soon. Erod, I think, fits for a lot of teams. If he were to come to the Jets, I'd almost look at him as a guy that you might think about flipping at the trade deadline. Erod's likely to be a good 40-ish point kind of player, and I think with the Jets, he offers more wing depth. He's a relatively creative player. He's industrious on the forecheck, not overly physical, but good enough to just do a lot of the little things right. And I think with Rodriguez, you'd get very solid middle six production. Again, you're probably not asking him to be, your direct Ehlers replacement 1-for-1, but if you're looking at this as more trying to replace and sort of fit guys in to win by committee, I think Erod makes a lot of sense. He also had a really crazy playoff run this year. His regular season, he had 32 points in 82 games, and then he got to the playoffs and he had 15 points in 21 games. That is considerably higher than, his regular season scoring rate. And my guess is, teams are going to be very interested in seeing if he can sort of replicate that success. My personal feeling is what he's done in the previous years, about 40 points a year. That's probably what you're likely to get out of him. And for $3 million a year, that is a bargain level price for the production that you're getting. He's a great player. I'd be curious to know how much it would take to get him out of there. I think the Panthers would probably offer him for not a ton in assets. And if the Jets are really treating this like a transition season, Erod might be a very, very hot commodity on the TDL market. So keep that in mind if the Jets season maybe doesn't go as well as they'd hope. But if the Jets do well this season and actually get farther into a playoff seeding position, Erod would really help you for the next couple of seasons. He'd be a great middle six option. He'd give you that scoring depth, and he'd be a good stopgap until one of Shiprikov or maybe Lambert really starts to sort it out and becomes a clear top six option. If the Jets go to a different team, they might be looking at the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, Tampa's kind of an interesting spot because they don't really need to clear salary as aggressively as they did when they were perhaps in on the Ehlers signing. But my guess is they still want to make some kind of a trade. And if that's the case, Oliver Bjorkstrand probably has to come off the books. Bjorkstrand does have like a modified clause of some sort. I would imagine the Jets are probably on the list right now, and I don't know that he would really be willing to waive that. So I wouldn't read too much into this. But if Winnipeg did find a way to convince him to maybe move for a year, Bjorkstrand would be another guy who's offering good middle six production. He has generally been a shot driving sort of player, whether it's from his passing or his own personal offensive creation down low. He doesn't really have a strong finishing touch, but I think he could offer some okay tertiary offense. For the next year, you've got him for about 5.4 mil. And I would imagine that if he does come to the Winnipeg Jets, it would be on a very short-term thing, right? He comes here, he maybe pumps up his value. The Jets maybe send him on to a contender after, the trade deadline. Again, if things aren't looking great with Winnipeg's playoff run. Again, if it does look good, then you obviously keep him for that postseason run. But my feeling with Bjorkstrand is I look at him more in the short term rather than an Erod who you could conceivably retain for beyond the season. The last team, though, that could be making a move, and this is a very interesting one, we haven't really heard a lot about the Ducks recently. The Ducks have a ton of cap space. They are looking to do something. I think free agency has been a huge bust for them. They didn't get Marner. They didn't get Ehlers. We don't really know who they were even after. And Verbeek just seems to be kind of doing something. I don't really know. But with the Ducks, they've got a certain RFA who might not be happy with the team. It's just a rumor from a random Twitter account, so don't read too much into it. But if verified, it would be very interesting. Mason McTavish might not be thrilled with Anaheim. And if that's the case, you might wonder if he would be willing to come to the Jets. The thing with McTavish is that I've heard some stuff about maybe his off-ice ethic and perhaps some of his personality stuff that would maybe make it a little bit of a harder fit for the Jets. I wouldn't really expect Winnipeg to be making a big play here. But if they do, and if they were to go after McTavish, he could be that really big transformative top six center that really overhauls your whole season. Suddenly you have a lot more offensive balance. You've got more speed and skill, and McTavish could legitimately be a marquee piece for the offseason. It would also give a little more breathing room to the Jets to not have to worry so much about bringing in, another young center. He would essentially be your 2C, and I think he would do it pretty well. You put him alongside Cole Perfetti, I think good things could happen. It would also really change the perspective on this whole offseason and make the summer look a lot more successful than it currently does. I think right now Winnipeg's kind of in a holding pattern. I don't really expect them to be that aggressive on the trade market. My best guess is they take on a cap dump from somebody, and that kind of does it for the remainder of the season. My feeling is because they signed all these one-year deals, they just don't feel super confident about this upcoming year. I think they're kind of reading the tea leaves and seeing some of the same stuff that some of us are, that maybe this team this year needs more draft assets. Maybe they need a bigger 2026 class run. I don't think they're going to advertise that, and I don't think that that's necessarily their direct intention. But the way that they've structured their contracts through free agency gives them a ton of flexibility. And it makes me wonder what they're going to do come the next March, right? The trade deadline might be really, really intriguing for the Jets. If they're in a good playoff spot, they can 100% add. If they are not really there, they're kind of in that wild card territory, they might look to maybe sell some of these contracts and turn them into some real prospect depth to kind of give this pool even more punch, right? Our prospect pool doesn't have a lot of elite forward talent, and maybe this is an area where the Jets can bulk up. They've got plenty of defenders that they've been drafting. They've got quite a few goalies now. They really need a little more offensive support. Past Lambert, Chibrikov, and Yeager, you've got some guys who are very interesting punts. Obviously Walton looks like he's shaping along. Kevin He could be a really good middle six guy, but they don't really have a lot of high-end top six talent waiting in the wings. So maybe if everything kind of breaks right and maybe your season doesn't go in necessarily the competitive direction, you could still win big. So the number of different ways that this year could pan out, I actually think is in some ways more exciting. Rather than the Jets being in that mushy middle, they have a real chance to overhaul their whole future core. And I know that that's not really interesting for a lot of people, and that's not really what they want to hear. Uh, again, this is projecting further into the future, maybe more than what Winnipeg is going to do. But I got to say, this is a really good transition point. And if ever there was a year for you to maybe take a season off, kind of do a stealth retool, and get yourself ready for the 26-27 season, I could think of a lot worse ways to do it than having maybe a season where things don't 100% go amazingly well for the team, but you still land yourself a nice draft pick. So Jets have options. I think that's the big takeaway. Winnipeg has options, and their AHL club might be really good. Might be a great time to go check out the Manitoba Moose based on what they have done this offseason. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on these closing thoughts, as I want to give the Jets some real roses for a particular thing. You know, a lot of people feel like I've been very critical of this season and this offseason, and I think, you know, the summer, if it's framed from the perspective of wanting to win the Cup, yeah, naturally, I'd be not very happy with what they've done. I don't think that that's their real objective right now. I think the Jets are maybe taking a bit of a step back, maybe slowing it down and preparing themselves for a better future. They're in such a good spot right now, contract-wise, to do almost anything they want. They're going to have lots of cap space. They're going to have all these choices to make. They could realistically go any direction, and they don't have to rip the whole team apart. That's the thing. They've got their franchise goalie. They've got their first-line center. They've got, you know, a couple of really big D who are about to be locked up outside of Morrissey. The Jets are in a good spot to really retool. I think that that's my big takeaway. They've also spent some real assets to try and repair the Manitoba Moose. And I think that that really is a very underrated storyline. Bringing in Clegg, Fajimo, bringing back Mason Shaw, who was just extended today. You brought in a new goalie, Poulter. This is stuff that actually makes a real difference. You know, Dewar maybe is not the highest offense guy, but he's also had an NHL cup of coffee. Fajimo has too. A lot of these dudes have had NHL cups of coffee. They bring decently high-level pro experience. Fajimo, one of the best AHL scorers in the league. That kind of stuff, I think, is awesome. This is where I'm really going to give the Jets a lot of credit, because I think Manitoba desperately needed a talent infusion. Why? Well, we talk a lot about whether or not the AHL is a development league, and I've said it's not, right? It's not really where I think, young prospects are necessarily going to learn the exact level of competition that they're going to face in the NHL. But given that the skill barrier in the NHL is so high, a lot of guys have a tough time cracking into the upper leagues. And so the AHL, if you improve the quality of the team around these kids and you give them a really competitive environment that feels more like the NHL, I think that that can only breed confidence and teach them good pro habits, and really give them a taste of what it can be with a big club. We see so many young players struggling to make the NHL these days. Very few prospects, when you look at it, come out of draft and make their teams. It just doesn't happen anymore. It used to be a little easier, but the skill barrier overall for even like the fourth line teams, or fourth liners on teams, has gotten so high that it's just really hard for teams to welcome in young prospects. And so for me, the Moose being a strong, supportive foundation for these guys is a really important part of the org. And the Jets didn't really spend that much in salary to do this. Shaw's cheap. Poulter's pretty cheap. Clegg is a really nice cheap signing. Fajimo really didn't cost them anything. This is stuff that I think is smart. Phil DiGiuseppe has a ton of pro level experience. You've brought him in to fortify your top six. It's going to bring the kind of skill and talent that I think this Moose team has been so badly needing. I am a little sad that Dylan Coghlan left. I think Coghlan was a legitimate guy who could anchor the top pairing for Manitoba. But, you brought in Clegg, so that's fine. He's another really good AHL defender. And, DiGiuseppe, Fajimo, I just feel like Winnipeg is taking Manitoba's situation very seriously. I think that that's a really good endorsement. And if you're looking at a player like Brad Lambert, who maybe looked underwhelming on paper, and a lot of people were very critical of his past season, well, he still was third in scoring on the team, right? finally giving him somebody to work with and giving them some real talent that's not just the usual AHL forecheckers, I think is only going to help breed more success and a better situation for the upcoming core of kids. Winnipeg, I know we talk about them as struggling with the draft and develop model because the development side has been really rough. I think the biggest challenge for them has just been graduating their prospects. I think if you make the Moose a lot better and more competitive, though, I think that transition period from, juniors to college to pros or whatever, to, even the big club, I think it can only make that process smoother. So I'm glad the Jets have really taken this offseason very seriously to try and get the Moose back to a remotely competitive state. I think it's going to have positive impacts. I think it's a very smart decision. And if free agency maybe couldn't fix the Winnipeg Jets, it could still fix the Manitoba Moose. And I think Winnipeg has gone above and beyond to really do that. So I know it sounds a little weird to sit here glazing the Jets for fixing the Moose, but I think that this is a really important, successful thing for an organization that is trying to build out a stronger foundation to graduate their prospects. I think that that is a great move. I think it's very smart. You've got guys like Barlow, Lambert, Chibrikov, all these players really knocking on pro-level doors, whether it's the Jets or the Moose. And so you need to put together a good two-part foundation that gives them a good transition point to that next level. And if the Manitoba Moose are a great winning destination, it also helps when the Jets maybe don't have the best seasons. Winnipeg just rode the high of a President's Trophy. They're probably not going to repeat. That's going to be very hard for them. So if they maybe have an off year, families might be looking to come to the Moose instead. And I think that that's great. Moose attendance hasn't been great for the past year or past couple of seasons. So if the team is really successful, maybe people will start coming back and really support the organization on both sides of the equation. I think that that can only be a good thing. Making the Moose profitable would be awesome. Make them fun to watch. Bring the families in. We know a lot of people complain about Jets ticket prices. Maybe the Moose being great will finally be that bridge in the gap. So all I can say is I think this is a great move. I think that if that's what free agency does for the Jets, that is a big deal. And I don't think a lot of people are going to talk about it enough because we're all focused on the Winnipeg Jets themselves. But curious to know how you feel about the Moose signings. Are you excited about the team? Do you plan to check out the Baby Club? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow to close out the week. But as always, thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.